Hello respected viewers, I'm George from Ireland. Here I am at Braybrook Street, London, and you can see the plaque here to the victims of the Shepherd's Bush murders, the three police officers, Head, Wombwell, and oh goodness, the last one, Fox. So Christopher Head was a sergeant, the other two were constables, as in that's the lowest rank in the police. When you join, you're a constable, you remain a constable unless you're promoted. Anyway, so this took place on the 12th of August 1966. What happened? Well, there was a van parked just here on Braybrook Street, and a plainclothes police officer became suspicious. The tax disc on the van was expired, so he radioed for help and two more plainclothes officers came. And the reason they're very vigilant around here is because just up the street is Wormwood Scrubs prison. There you can see it. Yeah, that is Wormwood Scrubs. And so breakouts happen from time to time. They thought these guys loitering for no good reason so close to the prison might be up to no good. So they decided to question them, and the van was in quite a battered condition, asking to see the guy's license. The license was due to expire just hours later because they expired at noon. It was daytime. Now these three guys here, they were notorious criminals. Head was a local sergeant, and he recognised this guy as a local hoodlum. The leader of the gang was Harry Roberts, who was a prolific armed robber. So Roberts was then 30 years old. He'd been in the British Army, served in Malaya, we now call that Malaysia, in the 1950s. He claimed to have killed at least 4 men by his own hand. He'd been in prison a few times, and he'd bragged to the fellow inmates that he'd sometimes had killed prisoners of war in Malaysia. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it's a measure of the man that that's the kind of thing he would think is worth boasting about. So he'd certainly acquired a taste for killing, and were very happy to do so again. But they had been planning an armed robbery. They carried out a number of them, Roberts had previously been given a 7-year sentence for duping his way into an elderly man's house, tying him up severely, beating him up to get money out of him. And the judge warned Harry Roberts that he had narrowly avoided a date with a hangman, because had that beating been a bit too severe, his victim could have died, in which case Harry Roberts would have been executed. The death penalty was still operational to 1965. These killings were 1966. Anyway, so Harry Roberts was nervous because he already had a criminal record as long as my arm. They had 3 unlicensed firearms in the van. The guys were getting anxious, and the police were therefore growing even more suspicious, would presumably insist on a search of the van. So Roberts decided the only way out of it was to shoot his way out of it. Didn't actually simply threaten the officers to back off or anything, take him hostage. No, he opened fire, no warning. So, and shooting them in the head. There was no attempt to wound them or trying to reduce the lethality. No, it was just definitely shoot to kill. So he shot dead 2 officers, and by that time his accomplice realised, well, we got to join in, because remember the law of common purpose. If you conspire to commit a felony as a result of which murder is committed, then you are equally guilty of that murder as your co-adventurer. Supposing that this other man, Duddy, hadn't killed another officer, but his accomplice Roberts had killed a police officer, Duddy would also have been held guilty of murder. Therefore he might as well join in the murders. The penalty wasn't going to be increased, and it would increase their chance of getting away with it if he killed these police officers. Dead men tell no tales. So the police officer who'd stopped them originally, he was in his car, and he started trying to reverse at speed, but before he could do so, Fox, he was shot dead, and he slumped over the car. His accomplice was also there. The other police officer was also already dead, so that was them. But of course there were all these houses here, and it would have been witnessed. It was a broad daylight, so they reversed very fast in that direction towards Wolfston Road and sped off. Now the van was later put in a lock-up at Vauxhall, South London, and the 3 went their separate ways. But some eyewitnesses had taken down the registration of the assailant's van, and the police were able to arrest the owner of the van, who was one of the murderers, within 6 hours. The other 2 went on the run. Now Duddy, who was one of the armed robbers, he fled to his native Glasgow, where he was turned in by his brother. Now, Harry Roberts was more resourceful than that. He went to Hertfordshire, the county due north of London. He'd been evacuated there during the Second World War as a child, so he knew the lie of the land. But he wasn't too closely associated with it. And then he managed to sleep rough and evade capture for 96 days. There was a huge hue and cry. It was front page news. It was the lead item on the television news bulletins and so forth. And the public was aghast. Police officers were very seldom murdered back then. There was that Let Him Have It case some years earlier. Derek Bentley, that was a murder, but between that killing, I think 1954, and this one in 66, I can't think of any murders of police officers. It seemed like the murder of a child or something. The police were not armed. To this day, they're not armed, generally speaking. There are very few firearms officers. Anyway, as I said, the death penalty had only just been suspended the year before, and then there was a public clamour for the death penalty to be reinstated. The majority of people wanted the death penalty to remain. They wanted that until even about 20 years ago, but there was a consensus amongst politicians that this wouldn't be the case. Harold Wilson was Prime Minister. Roy Jenkins was Home Secretary, who was genuinely liberal, and he came here to sympathise with the police, who of course demanding that the rope be reintroduced, especially for murders with firearms. Remember, the death penalty had been reformed through the 20th century. The number of death penalty offences has been reduced and reduced. You could be executed for a murder committed in furtherance of a robbery, murder committed with a firearm. Well, this was both, really. They shot the guys dead. Although this wasn't a robbery right here, they had been planning to commit a robbery later on. These guys were particularly moronic to be loitering here so close to the prison, therefore with a lot of police activity. Had they done it a few streets away, they probably wouldn't have been noticed. So the police were especially vigilant in this area. And I'm not sure what it was that they were going to rob. It was a betting shop or a bank or something like that. Banks used to have loads of cash back then on display. They thought they had to have the cash on display to get customers in. That there were no time delay locks. There were no the alarms. But bank robbery has been designed out as a crime. It's too difficult. You get far more money by internet fraud. Anyway, Roberts he was finally found sleeping rough in a cow byre. So he was arrested and he was arraigned. So he was found guilty at trial. One of his co-defendants had previously claimed that he'd sold the van sometime before, which was a lie, but later fessed up. So they all got life imprisonment, but then the tariff was issued as in the minimum amount of time they could serve before parole, and that was 30 years. But one of them managed to be released after only 25. I don't know quite how that works. One of them died in prison in 1981. So Roberts has moved from various prisons. So he feels absolutely guiltless. He's got no compassion. He just shrugs it off. He has no empathy. I suppose as a psychopath can kill people without, one iota of remorse. He would kill someone as thoughtlessly as he would sort of step on an ant or something. Human life really holds no value for him, but he definitely wants to be released. He regularly made models of the killings, and he was exceedingly proud of murdering these policemen. So at riots, some rioters, they would chant, "Harry Roberts is our friend, is our friend. Harry Roberts is our friend. He kills coppers. Let him out to kill some more, kill some more, kill some more. Bang, bang, coppers." Things like that to really rile the police. But so he tried to get released on several occasions. It didn't happen. He was briefly sent to an open prison, where it's a very lax regime. You could escape quite easily if you wanted to, but you'd be moronic to do so, because then you go back to a real prison. An open prison is a cushy number, and you're towards the end of a sentence. If you play your cards right, you'll be let free. But he was caught dealing drugs in this open prison, so sent back to a real prison. So he had quite some status there for being a hard man, for having killed policemen, and he appealed several times. He couldn't get through. It was turned out that his phone calls to a solicitor were tapped, and information gleaned from this was used at parole board hearings to deny him parole. He'd served well over his 30 years. Why wasn't he being let out? Well, the thing is, he was by no means a reformed character. He hadn't been rehabilitated. They felt he was still a danger to the public. He's very violent, and he's utterly unrepentant about the really incalculable grief that he's caused 3 other families. So finally in 2014 he was let out, because by that time he was, goodness, how old? He was almost 80, is that right? Yes. So and he's still alive 7 years later. So those are the Shepherd's Bush murders. And so Roy Jenkins, the Home Secretary, came here and he commiserated the police, but he had to say that the death penalty was not going to be reintroduced no matter how abhorrent these killings were. So that is the case of the Shepherd's Bush murders, even though strictly speaking we're actually in East Acton. That's enough from me. Toodaloo.